Hi, I'm Sandy Ray, founder of Sandra E. Ray CPA, where we alleviate financial headaches so that you can create a bigger impact. Today, we're talking about the components of creating a budget for your nonprofit organization. And I'm so excited about this topic. I love budgeting. I love thinking about all the possibilities for our organizations. This is a chance for us to dream. The downside of budgeting is it's a huge project. But like any other large project, if we break it down into bite-sized pieces, it's not so overwhelming. While budgeting is important to meeting our organizational goals, today I want to talk about the components of budgeting, and that usually revolves around revenue and expenditures, and that's what we're going to discuss today. So breaking it down into its components, I'm going to start with revenue, and I have 6 components for revenue. So let's get started. The general donations. Usually general donations are unrestricted money that we can use for any purpose to support our mission. So that's staffing, that's paying the light bill, or it is buying meals. Generally, these are our website donations, our general appeals, those kinds of things. For budgeting purposes, I tend to look at past donations and our growth trends. So if we're trending up or we're trending down, I take that into consideration. But I also like to go out to the watchdog sites and the organizations the other nonprofit organizations that conduct surveys on what is the potential for giving for the next couple of years. And I don't put as much weight on that as I do what our historical data and our growth trends. But if I'm kind of waffling a little bit about should I be a little bit more optimistic or pessimistic, maybe those surveys will sway me one way or the other. The next component of revenue for many of us is grants. Now we have unrestricted grants that we can use for any purpose, and that is wonderful. But many of our grants are restricted, and those restrictions are closely tied to the expenses that we're receiving, especially like a cost reimbursement grant. So many times when I'm looking at grant revenue, I will also be working on the expenses associated with that grant. Now there's some other complicators too. Grants can be multi-year grants. So we have to look at what portion of that grant do we expect to receive in our budget year that we're talking about. So that could be, if the grant is restricted over time, that could be based on the number of months of the grant that's in our budget period. But if it's based on performance indicators or cost reimbursement grant, we're really going to have to look at those performance indicators or what we think our expenses are going to be before we can predict what our revenue is going to be. And really, when it comes to grants, we have 2 types of grants. We have grants we already have or we know that are signed, but we also have grants that we are anticipating. We applied for them or we're planning to apply for them. We have to look at the likelihood of receiving those grants, and if it's really strong indicator that you will be receiving that grant, then maybe you want to include it in the budget that you prepare. But if you're not so sure, you might want to create a second budget. Take the first budget and add to that this new grant or this anticipated grant that you think you might receive, both the income and the expenses that are related to it. And again, you could create multiple budget scenarios depending upon how many grants and what the likelihood is that you will be receiving them. Sometimes that's helpful for a board to say, okay, this is what we're really sure about. This probably will happen. And then this is our pie in the sky. And if a grant is not received and we've put it in the approved budget, at that time, we will deal with it at that time. We will have a loss of revenue, but we will probably not have as many expenditures as well. The next area I want to talk about is monthly giving. Again, this is unrestricted money, and these are donors who have shown that they really support our organization by giving to us every month. So I tend to use the past history and the trends to predict monthly donor giving. The next area of revenue I want to talk about is in-kind donations. Please do not discount in-kind donations. They can have a significant impact on your operations. Just look at Goodwill Industries. They're more known for their thrift stores, which is their fundraising tool, than they are for their mission. Again, historical data is a great place to go for this when predicting in-kind donations, but don't forget about new programs and projects that you may be reaching out to your community. For example, right now there's a lot of backpack programs going on with back to school. If you're starting a backpack program, you may be reaching out to your community for supplies to fill those backpacks, or maybe you have an opportunity to get some training for your staff and you've been offered a scholarship or a discount. That's an in-kind donation that supports an expense that's required for your organization. The next major area of revenue I want to talk about is corporate giving. There are two major areas in corporate giving: corporate gifts and grants, and these can be restricted or unrestricted. And your relationship with that corporation is going to determine how probable that gift or grant is going to come in the budget year. So you have a much better indicator than I do. I definitely look at past history. What are the relationships we're developing now and the likelihood that those will come in as well. The other area I want to talk about with corporate giving is matching grants. Many corporations have a matching program where if the employees donate to a nonprofit organization, the corporation will match that donation, either some portion of it or maybe 100% match. Who knows? But don't forget about those matching contributions, and those can really bring in some significant dollars for you. Of course, the sixth area of revenue is everything else. In here falls our interest and our investment income. Investment income, very difficult to predict. I always like to say your crystal ball is as good as mine. If you have somebody who's really good at predicting what the market's going to be and how that's going to affect your investment income, that's wonderful. If you are in investments that are very conservative, maybe certificates of deposit or some stocks that just give very predictable dividends, those types of income are pretty easy to predict. It's just the fluctuations in the market value that is very difficult to predict sometimes, and I tend to be very conservative with that. And many times I'll budget zero, or I'll look at our past history over a significant amount of time and give it, 3, 5, 7% of the value of the portfolio. But other areas like royalties, if we have any royalty income, we need to look at that. And don't forget about your rebates and reward program. If you're getting points on your credit card that's going towards certain supplies or travel, those are expenses we would have incurred, and that is really income to our organization. Okay, so that wraps up income. That was the big chunk of what I wanted to talk about today. And then I want to talk about expenses. And of course, I'm going to divide expenses into the three areas of program, fundraising, and administrative in general, because you all know that's how we have to report on the 990. But it's also a good way to break things down for budgeting purposes. Now, with expenses, I generally tend to look at past history, look at inflation, and then also look at what we're going to be doing that's new this year or different. Do we have a new contract? Do we have a new program? Are we changing software? That kind of thing. Do we need some new hardware? So keep that in mind as we're talking about each of these areas. So for program-related expenses, I like to analyze each program separately. What are the direct expenses? And you need to get very detailed here. What staffing do we need? What are the expenses related to that staffing? Any materials that we need? Do we have a special website page? Are we going to be doing any marketing? Especially if it's a new program. Do we require a location to do this? And what are the costs associated with that location? And again, the IT related, the hardware, the software, the subscriptions, those are becoming very important to our organization. Moving on to fundraising. Again, what are the direct costs of fundraising and raising money for our organization? Obviously, we have employees, or maybe we have an independent contractor who does grant writing for us. We've got our printing, postage, and supplies if we're sending out printed materials. We've got our website and our e-marketing, related things. Maybe we're doing some things with MailChimp or Donor Drive or any of these marketing types of things. Those all need to be considered when we're talking about the direct expenses of fundraising. Also, the expenses related to our special events, like our galas, and maybe we have a 5K race or something else that we're doing, even if it's a bake sale or whatever. Those special events are part of our fundraising. And then finally, administrative in general. Now, this is everything else. What does it take to operate the organization? I'm going to start at the top. What expenses are related to our board of directors? Even though they may be volunteers, do we reimburse them for any expenses? Do we ask them to travel? Do we ask them to have certain subscriptions that we're going to be paying for? Management team staffing, again, compensation, benefits, that kind of thing related to our management team. Do we require an office space or a location? What are the occupancy costs related with our organization? How about insurance, risk management? What are our insurances? Our D&O, our liability? Of course, we've got workman's comp, all of those types of insurances that we're going to need. And I probably should have mentioned insurance in events or fundraising as well, because sometimes we have event cancellation insurance. Related, what hardware, software do we need to run our organization that's getting more and more costly with security issues? Website and marketing, obviously, we're going to be having that for our organizations, getting the word out about our organization. We're going to have a human resources department or person, or we're going to be outsourced to provide all those human resource functions that process our payroll. And then we're going to have the benefit cost for health insurance, retirement, whatever kind of benefits that you have. And then finally, we might have some interest expense. So that's it in a nutshell. Yes, budgeting is a big undertaking. And so, like I said, I want us to treat it as any other large project. We want to break it down into components. We want to get input from the team members that are closest to the function, because they are very aware of all of the details related to how that program or that function works. And I suggest that you schedule the process out over the course of a week or a month, depending on how complex your budget is. And finally, get yourself an accountability partner to help you meet your deadlines. Schedule some meetings and things that have to be done for those meetings, so you make those deadlines, you get that budget done, you don't put it off. And then dream big. Have multiple scenarios. I hope this was helpful for you. I want to thank you for joining me today. And remember that creating a bigger impact starts with stopping the nonsense. If you're dealing with nonsense in your nonprofit, I'd love to help you cut through the noise.